We've been learning together Rav Soloveitchik's essay, The Inner Transformation on Pesach Night. At the beginning of that essay, the Rav discusses how we have to emulate the two attributes that God exhibited on Pesach Night. The attribute of Havdalah, separation, and Gvura, courage. Earlier this week, we discussed how the Kabbalists delve further into the nature of these attributes. According to the Kabbalists, God can deal with the world in one of two ways, through Hashpat Panim or through Hashpat Oref. When God deals with the world through Hashpat Panim, he deals with the world in a direct and intentional manner, giving every creature and every person exactly what they need, and in a way that we can appreciate where our sustenance comes from. But when God deals with the world in the manner of Hashpat Oref, he gives to the world in a diffuse way, in an undirected way. It can be overwhelming and distracting. We might not always recognize where our sustenance comes from, and we might not truly appreciate what God has given us. The Rav connects these two ways in which God can relate to the world to the level of the firstborn son in antiquity. A firstborn son has all sorts of rights and privileges, simply because of when they were born. That is the level of Hashpat Oref. But the firstborn son has to raise himself above that level, to the level of Hashpat Panim, to live a life of direction and intention and purpose. This begins with the redemption of the firstborn, but is also an internal process in which a firstborn son has to recognize that his privileges also carry with it responsibilities and obligations. The Rav also connects these two ways in which God can relate to the world to the sanctity of the land of Israel. According to the Gemara, the sanctity of the land of Israel was not established permanently until the Jews returned from the Babylonian exile. The Rav asks, how could that be? Why wasn't the sanctity of the land established permanently from the first conquest of the land, when the entire Jewish people, led by Yehoshua, conquered the land together? Sanctity, the Rav writes, through conquest cannot last forever, because divine revelation as an expression of power, as a mighty hand and outstretched arm, cannot last forever. When sanctity is imbued with an overwhelming miracle, with an overwhelming display of God's might, it only lasts as long as that revelation lasts, which cannot be forever, because every revelation of God also limits us in some way. Instead, the sanctity of the land of Israel only becomes permanent after we returned from the Babylonian exile. That was a time of confusion and doubt. A small band of the Jewish people, led simply by Ezra, returned to the land. But only at that moment, rather than the human soul, the Rav writes, the sanctification of life, the elevation of the body, dedication and supreme devotion. Only at that moment, when doubt and confusion reigned supreme, could we inject the land with a permanent level of sanctity. Because it's when the divine revelation of the mighty hand and the outstretched arm has disappeared entirely, in times of crisis and Hester Panim, when God is concealed, the still small voice in the soul of the nation becomes far more pronounced, powerful, and exalted. It's at moments when we don't see God's hand, when we're not sure always exactly what we should do or what the future holds, when we have to act in a way of courage and heroism and know that even though we can't always see the effect our actions are going to have, that they will have a pronounced and long-lasting effect in the world. That is when we have the power to imbue things with a permanent level of sanctity. That is why the land of Israel's sanctity only becomes permanent from that return from the Babylonian exile, because it was a moment of doubt and confusion, when the Jewish people were required on their own to believe that what they were doing could transform the land. We'll continue learning the essay tomorrow.